Okay, so I want to discuss in political contexts the regressive left. Now, before I continue with this, because I do have quite strong views on it and I think it needs to be said, before I continue, I really want to emphasize I am not talking about all left wing people. Let me really underscore that. I am not talking about all left wing persuaded people. I know people on the political left who are very decent people, they're open-minded, they're compassionate, and whilst I wouldn't necessarily agree with them on everything, they do not come under the sort of regressive attitude that I'm going to be talking about in this video. So I think that's important to remember. When I talk about the regressive left, I'm talking about a specific group of people with a specific group of attitudes. I'm not talking about everyone with a left-wing persuasion. So I want to just get that out of the way from the outset. Nevertheless, I do think there's a problem in the political left, and it does exist on the political right as well. We can talk about the regressive right, but the regressive left has been more prominent perhaps because they have tended to be on the forefront of virtue signalling and pontificating about social issues. Recently, I would say, well, I can't say more than the right, but it's been particularly prominent. And there is a long list of double standards and flaws in their argument. So I'm going to address some of these positions that the regressive left take. Firstly, everything is the fault of the West. No matter what the issue, no matter what the geopolitical situation, whenever there is a party or a person or a group opposing a Western government, it doesn't particularly matter which Western government, whether it be the American government or the British government or the Canadian government or the French government, if there is a group on the geopolitical situation opposing that government, you can guarantee the regressive left will take their side, or at the very least turn a blind eye to whatever excesses they are doing. And it's pathetic. No matter what the issue, this is very prominent with Syria, and it really bugs me. Whenever you see a news report about Syria, there's always some idiots that come out and say, oh, well, the West funded ISIS. You know what? I'm actually yet to see solid evidence for that. And I'm not saying it isn't true, I'm just saying I'm yet to see solid evidence for it. Now that's one thing, but they will then go on to actually excuse Assad and Putin of their crimes in Syria. So Assad is a dictator, he is not loved by most Syrian people, and he has the blood of thousands of Syrian civilians on his hands. Putin's Russia has backed him. Yet these people will defend this just because it's the opposite of what the British or American position is, and I think that's pathetic. It is interesting too that their position is somewhat hypocritical. I mean, Vladimir Putin is not exactly a left-wing figure. Socially speaking, in the Russian context, he's actually pretty conservative. If you think about social issues like gay rights and all that sort of thing. Putin is, and this is a curious thing about communism, in the context of their own countries, I know Putin's not a communist, but I'm making the point that in the context of their own countries, communist systems are actually the equivalent in those societies of the conservative situation. But anyway, not to go off on a tangent, I say that because it is the status quo. It's the conservative state of being. The Chinese Communist Party is conservative in the socially sense because they're not the new party, so to speak. Anyway, so that's the first obvious thing. The regressive left blame the West for everything, no matter what the situation. And no matter what the West does, they'll blame them. So if the West took military action in a given situation, then they're warmongers. And if they don't do anything, then they're backing the terrorists. This is not to say that Western governments are innocent. Not at all. I still think we're far too close to Saudi Arabia, and I think that we have far too often put our deals with Saudi Arabia ahead of that country's appalling human rights situation. So, I'm not suggesting for a second that Western governments are innocent, but I do think that if you're going to criticise governments, you have to be consistent. Like I said in my last video, you have to be consistent. And one of the most notable things, in my view, about the regressive left is they're not consistent. So they talk about peace and socialism and all this, but they actually don't believe in peace because they support brutal dictators who commit war on their own people. The regressive left will go out of the way to defend Gaddafi and Assad and pretty much every other dictator of their choice. And they'll come out with all sorts of excuses like, oh, the West put them in this position, and they were brutal tyrants because they had to be, etc. But it isn't just when it comes to dictators. I mean, there's a lot that's been said about Castro. I don't need to go over it again. The left have absolutely exposed themselves in that one, the hard left. When they have said he made mistakes and the Americans somehow put him into that position. It's a very prominent example. Tariq Aziz, who's a well-known lefty commentator in Britain, was on a debate programme yesterday, and he was saying, I think it was, don't know if it was Channel 4 News or something else, but he was basically coming up with the usual whataboutery. Oh, but you backed Pinochet and you done this. And I said, oh, well, Castro made mistakes. It's typical far left trying to get into whataboutery. What about this? What about that? Instead of just acknowledging something. That's pathetic. And it is very, very symbolic of the attitude that the hard left takes. Islamic terrorism is another one. And this is a very prominent one. When it comes to Islamic or Islamist terrorism, to be quite honest, I don't see much difference. But when it comes to that plague on the world, the left may condemn it. The hard left even might say, oh, we don't approve of that. But you will notice they will always end up trying to turn it around and saying, oh, but the West created the situations where they could develop, or the West done this, the West done that. Or their classic thing is to shout Islamophobia. So whenever someone tries to say that there is a problem with violent intolerance within this religion, and there is, the regressive left will be the very first to shout Islamophobia. Now this is a very interesting thing, because they're actually abandoning their own traditional principles. For example, especially when it comes to feminism and gay rights, they put those temporarily to the side when it comes to Islam. I remember the time that Nigel Farage was attacked in that pub in, where was it? Somewhere in London, I believe, by a bunch of far left activists. One of them, forget the guy's name, he's not important enough to remember, but he was on the news trying to make excuses for it, and he said, oh, we never realised his family were in the car, blah, blah, blah. But he said, we want to represent love and tolerance, and we want to stand against Islamophobia. Now, it didn't escape my notice that this guy was gay, right? Nothing wrong with that. But the irony of that is the very Islamists he is downplaying will be the very first to throw him off a building because of his sexual orientation. So I find it astonishing that there are left-wing gay people who shout about Islamophobia when they're the very people who would be targeted by Islamist thugs. That's crazy. And it's this incapacity to understand that there is something beyond the British or American government that actually is a very serious problem. And I find it just, their mind is so narrow, they cannot just look beyond that. To them, they talk about peace, they talk about love and understanding and tolerance, but they absolutely turn a blind eye to intolerant, violent Islamism. And I think that is astonishing. Whenever anyone does try to talk about these problems, they shut it down. And again, I would argue that regressive left culture played a big part in the Rotherham abuse scandal. Why? Because the sort of political correctness that was embedded in society meant that anyone who was going to speak about those issues was dismissed as an Islamophobe. And it isn't the centre or the right that's causing that, it's the regressive left. Although, to be fair, and I have to say this as a centrist, there are some centrists who also are guilty of perpetuating these politically correct nonsense points of view. You know, when I say regressive left, I'm not just talking about socialists, I'm also talking about neoliberals. Because they're just as guilty of it. So I just find with the regressive left, there's an enormous amount of hypocrisy. You know, they talk about tolerance, they talk about pacifism, and yet they turn a blind eye when it comes to Islamists or dictators, and it just really annoys me. Then there's social issues within the West. I mean, I've made my position on the transgender issue clear. I basically take the view transgender people should be treated respectfully in a civil manner, and people should have the legal choice to do that when they're adults. But I would argue that, for example, New York's mayor trying to impose legislation against gender mispronouncing or whatever it's termed, I would consider that regressive left because it's attacking freedom of expression. It's basically saying we are going to be progressive by being regressive. You can't be progressive by being regressive. You can't on one hand argue you're progressive and then say, oh, but we're going to punish anyone who disagrees. That's stupid. So yeah, I'm sure there's many other things I could say, but that's just my views on the regressive left summed up. At the start I said I'm not attacking all left-wing people, and I stand by that. So if you are of the left-wing persuasion, please don't think I'm generalising. In fact, there's many positions I would say that I'm centre-left on. On issues of welfare, I would definitely be more to the left than the right. And with that being said, I also want to say to the right, I know that I do have some subscribers who are more to the right, and you're very welcome on my channel, but please never assume that I am of a right-wing persuasion. I've noticed a few times there have been people that have assumed that I'm a conservative or that I'm pro-Republican or pro-Trump or something like that. Absolutely not. I could easily make a video about the regressive right as well. And I'll just round up this video actually by saying that when right-wingers defend their dictators of choice, whether it be Augusto Pinochet or others, just because they happen to be pro-West, or for example if they downplay the extremes of Saudi Arabia, or if they downplay problems that are going on in society with police brutality, or genuine issues of Muslims being attacked simply because they're Muslims, I would call that regressive right, and it's wrong. I guess the only reason I'm focusing more on the regressive left in this video is because they've been a bit more vocal in recent years. But I'm not a right-winger in general terms. I am more to the centre-right on some issues, but I am a centrist. I cannot emphasise that enough. Thanks for watching.